6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah, talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." This is the word of the Lord.
In the ancient world, in ways that are not all that dissimilar from today, mountains took on magical or sacred significance. Most religions either had temples on mountains, or held rituals, or their gods lived there, or were born there, or did mighty deeds on mountains. Think Greek mythology, for example, with Mount Olympus. There's lots of examples of religion taking place on mountains. Because of their physical proximity to heaven and the fact that often their peaks reached above the clouds, people across time have believed mountains were mystical places. So when we read ancient stories, like we find in the Bible, when they tell us something happened on a mountain, it's a little bit like the author highlighting or underlining the story to get us to pay close attention. It's like when the teacher tells you this might be on the test, better write this down, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It's calling us to pay attention. We see it in the Old Testament. We see it with Moses. We see it in our passage that John just read with Elijah and Elisha, that we have all sorts of examples throughout the Bible of mountaintops playing major roles. Earlier in Matthew, Jesus teaches a sermon on top of a mountain, doesn't he? An important one. And today, Jesus encounters with his disciples Moses and Elijah. He himself is transfigured, bright and illuminated for his closest friends to see. The primary purpose of this passage seems to be to confirm Jesus' divinity. We've seen this already in Matthew before also, when Jesus is baptized and the dove descends, and God uses almost these exact same words, that with Jesus, God is well pleased. But maybe just in case we've forgotten, in the intervening 13 chapters, Jesus is glorified by 2 of the most important figures in all of Judaism. Moses, who embodies the law, and Elijah, who embodies the prophets. It is the epitome of granting Jesus religious authority. It would be like if Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley appeared at the base of the Hollywood sign with your favorite singer right before an award show. Or if Tom Landry and Roger Staubach appeared at this offseason's NFL draft and declared Dak Prescott our long-term starting quarterback. It leaves an impression it's hard to argue with. We are left with no doubt that Jesus is divinely appointed for his ministry on earth, and the importance of the journey we will be beginning this Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, is anticipated. Our journey through Lent and to the Last Supper and the crucifixion and the resurrection, all of it has God's authority resting behind it all. That this scene happens on a mountain perhaps is the exclamation mark to bring the point home. Our youth are going to be sharing stories of their own mountaintop experiences in their lives, these experiences where we feel especially close to God, often take place at retreats and conferences and other events that we as youth like to go on. They can feed us in ways that ordinary day-to-day events cannot, and that's healthy. I think their examples will be illuminating, and I'm glad they will offer their interpretation of the word in that way for us. I look forward also to them leading us all in a response in ways that we ourselves can interact with their meditation for our own meditations this day. So, Alan and Trevor, come on ahead.
Over the past few weeks, we have tried to think of mountaintop experiences of our own. We have never climbed a mountain with Jesus. So what do we have in common with the disciples?
Sometimes it is easier to think of being down in the valleys than to think of having mountaintop experiences. And sometimes our difficult trek upwards from the valley leads to the highest mountaintops we can think of.
If you walk up a steep hill or mountain, you are taxed and tested. But at the end of the climb, you look down on a scenic river or luscious wildlife that stays in your heart. Like Chapel in the Sky at Camp Gilmont, there is a steep and rocky climb that tests us. But when we reach the top, we are glad we made the journey.
With your thoughts on the peak of a mountain, you endure much to get there. Maybe an unexpected snowstorm, treacherous river crossings, or scaling steep, slippery slopes with too much weight on your back. And it is far easier to push yourself to complete the journey with a companion than all alone.
But sometimes when you reach the top, what you see is not what you're hoping for. Surprise, storms up ahead or not a spectacular view.
Life can be like a mountain, hard, demanding, and steep. When you finally reach the peak, life rewards you with a view, whether it be an insight or moral, a memory, or a physical or spiritual improvement. Together, our group has thought of examples.
Many of us have spent weeks at youth retreats at our Presbyterian, such as Youth Fest West, Senior High Youth Connection, Gap Weekends, or youth worship gatherings. And we've been on mission trips to places like Bonton Farms, Houston for Hurricane Harvey recovery, and Denver, Colorado.
We've had mountaintop experiences in nature together as a group and with our own families, exploring amazing places that make us think about God and creation. Places like Crater Lake, Big Bend, the beaches of California, cornfields in Nebraska, the Grand Canyon, and the Frank Family Ranch, where we take church retreats.
We've experienced God with being with friends and time in community here at church. We've even found ways for faith to speak to us in our activities at school, like sports, music, and other things.
Jesus and his disciples had a mountaintop experience. They had a chance to be together with Jesus up away from the crowds. The disciples got a vision of Jesus together with Moses and Elijah, great leaders from the past. This vision reminded them of the scriptures where they had learned about God's plan, like what we read from 2 Kings. Everything they saw and heard reminded them of something that the prophets had predicted would happen when the Messiah came. It was like a light bulb lit up in them. They figured it out. Jesus was the real Son of God. God had chosen them to know the secret to Jesus' power.
The disciples were scared by the vision of Jesus glowing and all, but they were also excited. Peter wanted to make shelters so that everyone could stay and keep talking to Moses and Elijah, their heroes from the past. The disciples probably felt that they didn't want to go back up to the real world. Up on the mountain, everything was kind of pure with God. When the disciples went down from the mountain, they knew that many other people would not understand their experience. Maybe they would even think that they were crazy. It's easy to understand why disciples didn't really want the mountaintop experience to end.
Everybody who has a mountaintop experience has to come down, and that's not always as easy as it seems. Like when we leave retreats and Presbyterian events, it's not only sad to leave behind friends and fun events, we also have to do our homework when we return.
When we return from mission trips, We realize how different the week focused on service feels from our day-to-day lives at school and at home with friends, which can feel very focused on ourselves. When we return from beautiful places in nature, we realize how different these places are from the sprawling suburbs of Dallas. And whether it is with our friends at church or our friends at school, it's always easy to tell when you aren't treating others the way they really should, and because of all the other times when we feel a deep connection acted faithfully.
What is the message of the story about Jesus and the disciples on the mountaintop? Why did the disciples get this great vision and then told not to tell anyone? Why did the disciples feel so great in the first place? Do we have to go up on the top of a mountain to know the truth about God? Maybe it was illogical for Jesus to pick disciples who weren't even really waiting for the Messiah to come at all. Jesus just said, "Follow me." But the disciples did follow, even though they didn't exactly know why or what would happen. They followed Jesus up the mountain and back down again.
I know that's true for me personally. As a performer, there's nothing more precious than telling your story and leaving everything you have on that stage. Hearing the oohs and the ahs of the crowd are the fine moments that we all live for. The ones that remind us of how lucky we are to be able to do what we do and how valuable the moments we have with each other really are. With the people that you meet, the memories that you share, and the final outcome of what you worked so hard and tirelessly to accomplish. I truly believe this resembles the many mountaintop moments we have in our lives, as it is God's way of showing himself to us, showing us all the wonderful things he has planned for us, and all the beautiful people he was planning to bring together.
Jesus tries to help us experience goodness, even if we're not expecting it. We aren't always 100% excited to go to retreats or mission trips, Youth Fest West, or Chi-C. We aren't always at our best when we come for youth group Sunday nights. We don't always have our best attitudes when we hang out with friends or family.
But that's when the mountaintops matter, because it is a blessing to know God's goodness and love, to experience hope and joy and peace, and for all the times when we feel far away from God. The times on top of the mountains are what gives us the energy to keep being faithful and keep doing God's work.
No matter where you are in life, God is there, and we can all find mountaintop experiences if we search for them. Because if Jesus can give life to a bunch of fishermen or Texas ranchers or youth like us, God can give life to you too.
But rather than leave everyone on their own to think about this passage, we would like to do this together. In just a moment, our ushers are going to come down the aisles with index cards, pencils, and pens. We would ask you to write down a mountaintop experience from your own life. When was the time when you felt God was using you just the way you were meant to? Are there places or people in your life that spiritually nourish you? Let's write them down together. And you can take these home with you and remember that God will always meet us on these mountains.